Welcome to the Theory of Pro Wrestling, where we explore modern pro wrestling through the lens of storytelling and narrative devices. I'm Jordan Cooper, joined as always by the Emmy Award-winning Jon Alba, who, based on what we're talking about today, would love to have more money in the bank.
Boy, howdy would I, but who wouldn't at the end of the day, Jordan? Welcome, everyone, to the Theory of Pro Wrestling. We had a great episode last week and the week prior talking about characters. Now we're going to be talking about those little extra somethings that help give those characters motivation.
And one of those characters, as one of those motivations we've seen recently with WWE Money in the Bank, is the cash-in, right? And when we talked about it, you did a preview as well as a review on the Wrestling According to Alba Patreon and Discord community. Every PLE and pay-per-view,
everyone,
you do a stream, you do your predictions, you do your reviews.
You don't got to even watch WWE TV. I'll catch you up. You just tune in for my preview and review shows. I got you.
Right. So go.
I feel like that's the case with a lot of PLEs in the first place. You don't have to have watched any TV. You get the video recap before the match. You're good to go.
Well, the recent one, Money in the Bank, Damian Priest, Io Sky, they're the briefcase holders.
They are.
So they're eligible to cash in, right? And this concept, the cash-in concept, the whole Money in the Bank concept, which is not just a WWE thing. We've seen other promotions adopt it. The Casino Ladder match in AEW. Impact had some like a King of the Mountain. Then they had like Feast or Fire. They've had derivatives of this.
Yes, the Feast
right.
or Fire case.
Independents have done these types of matches. In the past, these matches still existed of like number one. I mean, just simply the number one contenders match. Whoever wins this match, they will face the title holder, the world title holder, whatever title holder. They've had ones where blah, blah, blah on a pole, right? The contract is on a pole, and now you have a title match. I think I don't know, you tell me, before 2005, was there ever a concept where when you won the right to a title match, that this also means that you could cash it in literally at any time, which includes like in the middle of another person's match or right after the other person's match? Was that a concept before then?
Not to my knowledge. And I actually saw Brian Gewirtz tweet out the other day that the initial idea with the Money in the Bank was that the cash-in would happen in a heavily advertised match. And then someone, he didn't say who, backstage was like, well, if a heel were to hold this thing, wouldn't they just want to use it whenever it was most opportune for them to have a match? And that's when the wheels started turning. They said, that would make sense. And then we've seen babyfaces use it too in inopportune times for heels. So to my knowledge, Jordan, I don't believe that concept did exist. I think wrestling was viewed with much more structure. But following the era of unpredictability, something we talked about last week, it would appear that the Money in the Bank was birthed.
Of course, if you listen to Chris Jericho, you would say he came up with it.
Of course he did.
Right. And apparently it was due to the fact that in the 2005 Mania, there were a bunch of talent that had no matches. And Jericho, of course, typically the worker that he is, how do I get on this card? It's like, why don't you just put us all in a match and have it be a ladder match and have this, the title holder, the contract. It wasn't even a briefcase. It was supposed to be, kind of just a paper or clipboard or something. And then Vince McMahon said, no, it has to be it should be in the briefcase. And the original thing was, well, the Raw after Mania, the person would have the title match like then. It would be very distinct. But because of that concept of cashing in at any time, to me, the match itself is less important than the aftermath. I think that this is the start of a story rather than the culmination of one.
Yeah, and that's what it has certainly evolved into. I don't think that was necessarily the initial intendance of it, but it certainly developed into that, and it also developed into a vehicle where you can start to see different motivations from characters, and you can start to evolve characters with it, whether it's over the course of them holding the briefcase or when they cash in, a la CM Punk in his second cash in, which was utilized as a heel turn for him, or CM Punk the second time when John Cena had declared he was going to cash in his Money in the Bank opportunity, and Big Show interfered, and CM Punk, rather than granting John Cena a rematch, turned heel on him instead.
And this type of dynamic, I mean, before 2005, really wasn't as much of an option. But from a storytelling perspective, the winner of the Money in the Bank match, now, I mean, obviously, from a booking business standpoint, we tend to view it, the audience tends to understand how the business works, that this is a way to elevate someone. This is a way to say, hey, this is someone that, based on obvious history, I mean, we're what? The concept was what, 18 years ago, right? Something 15, 18 years ago, that there are way more successful cash-ins than not. That this is someone that you could see holding the world title, or an important title at least. So I think from a storytelling perspective, it's the beginning of the story of the person winning the briefcase is a signal to the audience of, you need to pay more attention to this character. We have, even if we have not presented them as like a top story, like a top protagonist, we're going to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and that is something that we have seen time after time, except for last year, and that's a whole nother conversation, which I'm sure we'll have at some point, where there was a decision made last year that was not an earned cash in by any stretch of the imagination, that questioned the integrity of this stipulation that they have put in place.
Yeah, but the actual winner, I mean, they pushed Austin Theory.
He was featured more. Would I say he was pushed? I don't know. Featured? Sure. Was he presented in a light where he would become a major player in the company based off of him holding the briefcase? I would argue that that was not the case. Even with him wrestling John Cena, I don't think that was a result of him winning the Money in the Bank briefcase and carrying it.
Do you think there's a big difference though? Because I mean, I don't know, Theory's kind of like in this like middle zone. Like, to me, the person that wins a contract like that is someone that, from a storytelling perspective, like in a plot of anything, TV, film, or anything, that the most important factor, being that the audience is aware of what you're doing, is that the winner has to be credible in some fashion, where you believe, even if they take the shortcut, the most they cash it in at a time where it's like, yeah, anyone could have done it at that time. It doesn't feel as compelling. Like, I remember during the pandemic era, the Otis. I like Otis. Baron Corbin. I like Damian Sandow. I like, they give the briefcase to some people where I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they do. I just don't buy it. But then you also have the problem where, if you give the briefcase, we saw with Brock Lesnar, like, does he really need the briefcase?
No. Did John Cena need the briefcase?
Right. But I can understand from a storyteller's perspective of, we don't have anyone credible to give this to, and I don't think the audience is going to buy whatever mid-card talent they're going to put it on. So why don't we give it to someone towards the top of the card? My stance is, if you're going to do that, the more compelling way to do it is use it as a vehicle for a character turn, rather than it just be a static thing that the guy has and uses. Even though you view John Cena going, the dude could get a title shot practically whenever he wants. Why does he need the briefcase? If they used it as, oh, well, having the briefcase changes his character, and it propels him into such a different story. Then it's like, oh,
look what it did for Daniel Bryan, right?
Hmm.
It changed Daniel Bryan's character completely. Him holding that briefcase started making him cocky. And then all of a sudden, as he becomes cocky, he starts doing the yes stuff. And then it turns into him turning full-fledged heel, which was used as a great vehicle. And CM Punk, as I said before, it was used in that instance as well to help change his character dynamic when he cashed in. Pretty crazy, Jordan, that no one has used the briefcase to declare themselves the main event of WrestleMania. Like Seth Rollins cashed in the main event of WrestleMania, right? And it was this big surprise moment. And that's one of the most effective usages of a tool like this to enhance a character. But wouldn't it, from a canon standpoint and a logic standpoint, if a character was trying to elevate themselves, wouldn't they just want to guarantee themselves the main event of WrestleMania? Like even a babyface, wouldn't that make so much sense?
I think. See, I stand on two sides of the coin for that. It depends on how the promotion itself as a character is portrayed, because truthfully, what your logic states that, like, why wouldn't you want to be in the main event of WrestleMania? It's like, well, is the motivation of the characters like a business perspective or a prestige perspective? Typically, pro wrestling is presented in a way where the business of how much money the characters make is obfuscated, right? We don't know how much does the title holder actually make. Like, to the heels, a lot of times that's a motivation. You see, like, I want to be the title because now I have all these riches from being the Ric Flair, right? It's like when you're the NWA World Champion, you're rolling in money and everything like that. I'm not sure if, like, the character itself, you're mixing in like the performer's motivation. Yes, obviously you want to be in the main event of WrestleMania, but the character may I'm here to win the title. It doesn't matter where or when it is, right? The difference to the character on where they are. I mean, it comes back to the whole thing of Brock Lesnar being upset that he went on first at WrestleMania. Like, you're breaking the whole. You're almost breaking kayfabe there of, like, no, that would be a reason why Brock Lesnar, the person, may be pissed, but maybe the character shouldn't care when they're on the card. So do you see how yes, it makes logical sense if you use the character performer hybrid, but once you take away that performer hybrid, should the character even care about being the main event?
Main eventing WrestleMania is a major catalyst for action for a lot of baby faces. That's not
only certain ones, only ones that's their motivation.
My case wasn't, oh, everyone should be doing this. It was, okay, I'm surprised we haven't seen it done.
Like, who would it have fit?
Daniel Bryan. He immediately comes to mind. And if I'm not mistaken, he even said it at one point, but then they turned him heel, so it didn't really matter. Daniel Bryan, it could have been used for. John Cena, it could have been used for. Let's see. I'm trying to think of actual winners that had it. It is such a heel tool that very seldom, even with the baby faces winning.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask next. I think one thing that majorly needs to be discussed is the difference between babyface winners and heel winners, and what the pros and cons, because I see pros and cons of both. Mm-hmm. We typically see heels that have the briefcase because it is a tool of tension. It brings peril to the babyface that doesn't have to be in a match. That anytime the babyface is out, defending his title, the heel's kind of circling around going, when am I going to take advantage? Yeah. And that, from a virtue standpoint, that's not much of a babyface type of trait.
No. Real quick, Big E is someone you could have done that with, by the way. Big E, if Drew McIntyre had won it, Drew McIntyre is the type of guy that you could do that with. just finishing my point. But yes, you're absolutely right. It is very much a tool that lends itself to the heel being willing to strike at any moment. I mean, Edge laid the groundwork for that with his first cash in. So yes, it does feed into that much more. And plus there's the unpredictable nature of it where you have the notion that a heel can strike at any moment's notice, and unpredictability, I think, plays into the lore of the briefcases, that it's one of those welcomed unpredictable moments. It's not just something that happens for the sake of it. If there is a cash in is going to be earned no matter what, just based on the virtue of the stipulation in itself. By winning that, it is an earned action.
So, but what do you think the cons of having a heel have it versus a babyface? Because truthfully, I think in modern times, with the audience being a little bit more aware, you mentioned, I don't know if it's on a previous episode or at least one of your streams at wrestlingaccordingtoalba.com, that with the Jungle Boy turn at, Double or Nothing, like it was teased. He had a chair in his hand, he had the title or something, and he was going to go and he was going to cheat.
It was in
and
the
he
forward.
didn't, and everyone booed. It's like, no, you're supposed to. That's not what you're supposed to do. The baby, they're supposed to cheer. Oh, thank God, Jungle Boy didn't turn. Like the audience is aware of this. Do you think that the cash in itself being a moment, like audience wants to see a moment,
Absolutely,
that the cash in, and I think the Seth Rollins one is a perfect example. It's not like Seth Rollins was positioned much as a babyface then, but having the cash in at the main event of WrestleMania is a moment.
Huge moment.
So you're on. Do you think that unless
there were two things on that, Jordan. There were two things on that. It was the moment, and it was the fact that no one in that stadium wanted to see Roman Reigns win that thing, and that was the other thing.
Right. So the opponent, just like in the last episode, the opponent, Rollins, was a tweener, and then now he gets babyface reaction because no one wanted to see Roman.
Yes.
But do you think that the difference in the reaction that you get from the audience with the cash-in attempt is very much geared by the amount of tension that you build, the storyteller builds with that and very similarly, like why we see a lot of baby faces cash in much quicker than heels, because there's not much of a that the briefcase is more, you're more of an antagonist with the briefcase than a protagonist. We rarely see someone win the briefcase and go, I'm the protagonist, and like, this is my story. It's like, well, then just cash in it. Like, you do it as quickly as possible. You're not going to, having the babyface stalk a heel you're being portrayed as the antagonist
unless it services you getting behind the babyface more and getting under the heel skin. Like, for example, and I'm speaking strictly in hypotheticals here, okay? Strictly. If Kenny Omega in the Hangman Page story, okay? If Hangman Page had a briefcase that he could cash in, and Kenny, deep down knowing how much he had fucked Hangman Page in the past, knowing that this was lurking behind him, and Hangman is just there reminding him of that, there's a way where you're servicing the babyface there and the heel as well.
But he did win the chip. I mean, Hangman won the casino ladder.
Right. No, but
then the casino ladder match was only like a month before full year.
And there wasn't the notion of, oh, he's going to cash in like at any moment's notice,
right?
Because that hadn't been an established stipulation. But my point being that, like, you understand what I'm saying, where the heel having to deal with that and having to suffer inside their own head, that services the baby face and the crowd getting behind them. They're playing the mental mind games.
That's much harder to do with them.
It is absolutely much harder to do. But there are circumstances where that can happen.
But would you agree with me that if a heel holds the rights, we're calling it the briefcase, but it could be the chip, it could be whatever, it could be something that doesn't exist as a thing. Just they could come out and just say, we saw it in GCW, Blake Christian with Masha Slamovich. That it happened. Whatever you want to call it, we're calling it the briefcase because Money in the Bank is kind of like the most mainstream accepted version of this stipulation. it's much more beneficial for heels to hold it longer because that will get them more heat as a heel rather than the heel that in the history of the Money in the Bank. And remember, like I didn't watch live a lot of the Money in the Bank era since 2005. What were there instances that you remember of heels cashing it in like very quickly against baby faces rather than use the because to me as a storyteller it feels like this is a perfect way to extend like a good 3+ months of getting heel heat so that this may be the right time. Nope, I'm going to wait for even a better opportunity. Oh, this could be the time, and then you're just like you're rooting for the baby face to be like, no, 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 get up, get up, get up. He's here. He's here. Oh, that didn't happen now. Oh, get up, get up. Oh, it didn't happen. Like that services a story so much more. But were there instances where, I mean, I have to assume with WWE sometimes, booking things on the fly a little too much. Have
So
there
you're
been
saying
instances where heels just
were,
cashed in
were
like
there
the
in,
next night?
yeah, so there were a few. Jack Swagger cashed in the week that he won the briefcase
Mhm.
on Chris Jericho. And honestly, I think Jack Swagger was someone who would have benefited from having it longer and building his character more because I don't think people were really all that invested in him as a character. And him holding the briefcase might have added more equity to him for when he did cash in, but his happened, I'm pretty sure, the week of WrestleMania. Um, Kane, when he was a heel, I think he had the briefcase for less than an hour when he cashed in on Rey Mysterio, if I'm not mistaken. Edge, the second time he won it, cashed in the same week. I'm fairly certain.
Do
Um,
you think a lot of these were done? I mean, I know we don't talk about booking. Do you think a lot of these were done because, truthfully, they didn't have really a long-term plan?
I think some of them probably. I think some of them that's the case. Yeah.
And then also,
Um,
but you also see the opposite of someone holds it for so long because there is no plan and they're just waiting. I mean,
and
the
listen,
Austin Theory one is
I
exactly.
don't think that's necessarily the worst thing in the world. Like I think if the company pinpoints someone, they're like, that's a guy that we can run with down the line. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to see them get it and then figure out where to go. As long as it's not going to handicap their the sense of the storytelling and the logic behind the storytelling. But then there are instances where, quite frankly, I think they just like lose interest in someone holding the briefcase, like Austin Theory. And again, they undermined their own stipulation with how they did it last year too, which I think damaged the stipulation at least in the short term.
You say they undermined it because he was the only person to ever cash in on a non-top title.
Yes, and it was never established prior to that that it could be cashed in on a non-top tier title. This is the first year that that was established in canon that that could even happen. So the fact that it had never even been established and we see him doing it, it undermined the integrity of the stipulation, in my opinion.
Well, as a heel, shouldn't the audience view it as like, wow, you're being stupid?
And why wouldn't the heel want to cash in on the world champion? Like I get in one lens you can look at it as be like, oh, that adds a lot of merit to your mid card title. But at the same time, when you have a track record of almost 20 years of people going for the big one, and they always push that, hey, this is your virtual ticket to becoming the world champion, why wouldn't you cash in on the world championship? Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, on the opposite spectrum, to throw it back at you, the whole notion of when baby faces have it, we see this all the time. Babyface has it, and then they call their shot, right? Because we think in terms of a babyface attacking a vulnerable heel is not a virtuous action. And of course, we've established on this show that we don't really view babyfaces and heels based on virtue. So it doesn't matter to us. But you see a lot of opinion that the babyface move is to come out and say, well, I'm not going to wait till you're the most vulnerable. I want to match it, whatever the next pay per view or PLE or whatever. I'm cashing in then, and we have a match and we're even. Doesn't that undermine the stipulation also? Because shouldn't the babyface dude? Yes, it's not a babyface-ish virtuous way to do it, but it comes across as babyface being pretty stupid to not just do it at an opportune
Yes,
time and call their shot.
yes, but also when a heel is hated and the crowd wants to see them get their comeuppance, I don't think the crowd really cares how it happens. I think they're fine, in fact, if that cocky heel, that dickish heel, gets a fast one pulled on them. I don't think that translates to looking poorly upon a babyface. So maybe it's become a little more acceptable in that sense. And yeah, you could say a babyface that calls their shot is maybe showing their hand or not the smartest, but I also don't think it reflects poorly upon them as a babyface to do the surprise cash in as much as some would think on the surface.
Is there a difference between the way a babyface holder and a heel holder has it as far as it creates tension? Like what other ways? Because we see the stalking. Like that's I mean, it's very easy to do where the champion, regardless of if they're a heel or a babyface or whatever, is having a title match, is having a mixed tag match, a tag team, I mean, whatever, in the ring, right? They're always subject to like, well, they're going to be tired or whatever. And you get the briefcase holder, oh, they're going to be out at ringside or they're going to be on commentary, right? Or, it's going to be something like that where they're going to come out to the top of the ramp and stare or sit in a lawn chair or whatever, whatever way that they show that type of element. Are there other ways to provide that tension? And on the other hand, do you think that there's a value in removing the tension sometimes?
So
And
it's
we
more
don't see,
unexpected.
right, we don't see that as often of the briefcase holder essentially becoming like almost forgotten. They're involved in some other story, and it's like dude, and then maybe they're a babyface and there's a babyface champion, and they're like, don't worry about it. Me and you are good, so you don't have to. And maybe they're even teaming up or something like. It seems like you don't see as many of those dynamics
No, that
where
would be a great way to tell that story. And then that would also be way to be used as a catalyst, Jordan, to create development in character if someone were to pull something more sly like that. I think a way
even if
to
it's not sly, what maybe it's genuine.
and it might be, but even so, you can still develop character off of that. I think that if there were more promos from babyface Money in the Bank winners, where they're reminding people of who they are and that they have the briefcase, I think that would be serviceable. Working around some of those more tropey instances like what you just expressed. Basic things that build foundations for characters, I think would work equally as well for babyface Money in the Bank holders.
Do you think that the briefcase is often too used as a crutch in the way like if you have the briefcase, you have a shortcut. Essentially, you have this, get out of jail free card. Do you think that it undermines the character and undermines the story we talk about the credibility? And we see it very often in WWE that someone wins the briefcase and then in the next 4 months seemingly loses like a lot of their matches. And it's like, well, they could lose matches because they have an out anytime they want.
They got to get out of jail free card.
Right. But doesn't that reduce the credibility
I
of
think so.
Okay, so you're alongside with me that from a storytelling perspective is it almost makes it feel like the Money in the Bank is your words unearned rather than someone that is obviously dominant that now is my time and has proven to the audience as part of the story that even if they're going to win cheaply, win the title cheaply. Like, to me, any cash in is a cheap win because the other guy automatically gets protected when it happens in the middle or after the
Well, right,
match.
and I just don't understand why you would want to undermine someone after going through hell and going through a war to win that and then cheapen them. Now, if you were to use that consciously in a story where they win the briefcase, they're feeling really good in their bravado, but then they start losing and you're starting to see it affect them. You're starting to see it affect their psyche. Well, I won this thing, so shouldn't I be like on top of the world right now? Shouldn't I be? And then that serves as a catalyst for when and on who they cash in. Like maybe you have a babyface win, Jordan, and then they start losing and they start questioning themselves. And then they do something very uncharacteristic. They cash in on a friend because they need to win back their confidence. They need to win back. Well, now all of a sudden, you've just developed a great character and you're telling a good story with that. That's where I think you could utilize it. But otherwise, we've seen it so many times where they just lose and lose. And it's like, it's fine. They'll cash in and be fine. I think if you utilize that as a way to tell an effective story, you'd start to get to relish in the fruits of your labor.
Well, I also think that if you're going to put the title on someone, that credibility matters a lot.
Yeah.
For the audience, that you're basically saying this is the top guy, this is the number one protagonist, this is the number one protagonist, this is the star of the show. That there should be no reason why they shouldn't appear as it shouldn't. It should come across to me, at least. I think it's much more compelling that if the character that cashes it in, because it's automatically a cheap way of winning, I should have, it feels like, at least most of the time, that my reaction as an audience member should be that I think they could have won even without the briefcase. Like, because the story can't, to me, unless it's a heel, the story really can't continue past that with a babyface cash in like that, because then it almost makes it feel like the character is not a credible title holder anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You understand that? And that comes all the way back to giving the briefcase to mid-carders that, like, I don't see. It's very similar. We talk about Chekhov's gun with the Royal Rumble of like, yeah, there's 27 guys in there that, like, I know aren't going to win because you've made the stipulation that they're main eventing WrestleMania, and these guys aren't. All these guys aren't. They aren't going to do it. I already know they're not going to do it. So I view it the same way with Money in the Bank of, like, don't give the briefcase to someone that I don't believe has a credible shot at winning the world title without it being cheap, unless it's a smarmy heel. But the babyface side, sometimes I.
Well, I think the most famous example is the Otis situation. Otis was hot in that people were into his comedy shtick that he was doing. They really liked the Mandy Rose story that he did at that WrestleMania. They found a way to do a comedy Money in the Bank match, which is essentially what that particular year's Money in the Bank ladder match was. It was a comedy match. So they had the comedy character win it. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, shit, what do we do now? There was no plan. They went for the moment rather than the long-term play. And then eventually they had to book themselves out of the corner that they had themselves in, and The Miz ended up taking it.
Do you think that's a good storytelling dynamic of that they don't do often enough, of like someone else winning the contract
defending the briefcase?
Right.
I mean, I think if you're a noble babyface, defending the briefcase is a storytelling device that you can use that will add intrigue to a match. Sure. If everyone was doing it, it would lose a lot of value. So I don't have an issue, Jordan, with it being a seldom used stipulation.
And you think it's much better if it's a heel?
Oh, 100%. I mean,
right.
I think the babyface defending it is like a babyface defending a championship.
But it wouldn't work if a heel is defending it.
I don't think it would make a heel unless the heel had been using it as like a weapon in their matches, and then they're forced to have to defend it because now they have put themselves in a situation where they are at risk of losing it. That's where it would be effective with that. But I would say traditionally, you would want it to be the babyface having to defend it.
Well, I can see an instance where a heel has the briefcase and a hot babyface. Like I'm thinking of like the Daniel Bryan
I
example type of thing of like there's no way for this character to get a title shot other than I'm I'm challenging the heel that has the briefcase. And this gets to another point. It goes along with this. Do you feel that I don't know if anyone is stated it like this, that this type of stipulation, whether it be Money in the Bank, casino ladder match, anything like that, do you think that the stipulation is automatic by the format of weekly TV and the amount of content that the promotions have to put out, that in kayfabe, the stipulation of the contract is automatically undermined by the fact that you'll see the title being defended against people that are, to the audience, significantly lower on the card.
not
So
as
it's like when you have hey, someone wins the chip in AEW, right? Again, and it's like, okay, well, I have this right to a title match, and then it's like John Moxley versus AR Fox, world title. It's like, yeah, I like AR Fox, but he's not like, what gave him the right to even have a title match? And if he could get a title match, what the hell's the point of the briefcase?
Why'd you have to go through the Elimination Chamber?
Right.
Why'd you have to go win the Royal Rumble? Why'd you have to go win Money in the Bank? Yeah, I mean that absolutely is something that happens, but I think wrestling fans accept it anyway because they understand the nature of the beast is that this is 52 weeks of television every year. And it's just simply overlooked because at some point you're going to have ways to declare number one contenders aside from just your one tool that you have there in the stipulation match. So I think it becomes acceptable. Does that make it right? I don't know. That's not really for me to say, but I think that's why it becomes mediated and it becomes acceptable in that form.
Is this a good argument? Not to get off topic a little, that there are a lot of people recently, as of the time of this recording, Roman Reigns has not defended his title since WrestleMania, right?
God, that's crazy.
But doesn't, to use the argument like you said against you, doesn't that make it now that whoever gets a title shot, like that's a big deal because the title is not defended that often. And in AEW currently, MJF doesn't defend the title. He's in other stuff, right? And being a mixed tag or, multi-man, something like that. That the stipulation of those types of things, like the right to earn a title shot, the right to earn something, is almost better off against in promotions where actually you don't get to really see the world title holder really wrestle that much.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It adds a little bit of that merit to everything you just said. Those circumstances are going to be few and far between in wrestling, though. I do feel like that's an outlier situation, especially in Roman's case. So I still think we find ourselves in that same situation of we're going to overlook other challengers coming up through different forms just due to the nature of the beast.
Lastly, we've seen failed cash-ins.
A few.
Right? Mm-hmm. A few, right. Well, this is the main reason that we're talking about, like, how it's different with baby faces versus heels, whatever, because the storytelling device of the briefcase is more geared towards pay attention to this guy, this woman, whatever, is going to be important. Most likely they're going to win something, right? It's going to be extremely pivotal in the plot of the main title that most people are like, well, that's probably the guy that's going to win. It's going to have the title at some point in some fashion. How he does it, we don't know. Failed cash-ins, it feels like storytellers have rarely frame them well. Like it almost feels like failed cash. It almost feels like Baron Corbin failing to cash in. Like when typically you win the briefcase, and people now the audience is like, oh, okay, this is going to be a main player. And then when they fail, it's almost like they're now at a level that they were below when they started, when they got them. Like it almost feels like you actually did them a disservice.
Look at Sandow. What happened with him? 100%. I mean, Sandow lost. And Sandow, I mean, I always feel so bad. That guy is like a what if in wrestling, because his cash-in so obviously happened because they decided on a whim they were going to unify the two championships, when that definitely was not the plan when he won the briefcase. And then he randomly, without any reason, essentially cashes in on John Cena, has a really good match on TV. And then that's it. We never see Damian Sandow in that light ever again. That was it. Never portrayed as a major player ever again. And Baron Corbin, like you said, I would argue to this day has not reached that level of where he was prior to winning the briefcase.
Not even when he won. Prior to that.
Prior to winning the briefcase. Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you think the storytellers?
Nikki ASH.
Well, yeah, there's another one. Well, how could they avoid the thing is, how could you avoid a failed cash-in weakening a character?
Utilize the cash-in failure as motivation. Utilize it as a catalyst for action, for something else to occur that furthers their character.
Do you think they don't? Here's the $1 million question. Comes back to the previous episode about vulnerability.
Right.
Do you think that type of story is not told in one company versus the other because the people in charge of one company don't necessarily view vulnerability as a positive character?
I'm not going to speculate or guess, but maybe that's something that happens. But think about how compelling that would be where it is utilized as such. I think in so many times with Money in the Bank, a failed cash-in is looked at as an end game rather than a starter. Whereas it could be used as a start to a story that would help take that character on a journey over a period of time, whether it puts them down a dark path or maybe it puts them on a turn towards the light. Maybe a heel fails to cash in and realizes, hey, you know what? This is a product of my own doing. I need to do things the right way going forward. And that's not a new we've seen explored enough.
Truthfully, shouldn't the failed cash-ins for character purposes, aren't they more effective, or at least more compelling for baby faces? If you're going to use vulnerability, like I understand for a turn, like if you want to say that a heel fails to cash in against a baby face and goes, I got to change my bad ways, and then turns that way. The underneath baby faces always work in pro wrestling. Don't you think that the catalyst for a baby face failing and then going, well, that's just it's more adversity, John. More adversity.
You need more hurdles to clear.
Right.
Listen, as long as it's done in a way where the babyface doesn't look like a freaking loser. Like there's ways to lose without making them look stupid, right?
Has there ever been a failed cash-in that doesn't make them look stupid?
Let's see. I'll go through the list here.
Because that's my contention is that they could have written these failed cash-ins in a way that it didn't make a character that shouldn't have looked stupid look stupid. Now, yeah, if you want to, Damian Sandow, if they want that, there's some characters that if they wanted to move them into like stupid heel type of territory in the mid card, and look at him, stupid cash-in type of thing, that's one thing. But it seems like sometimes these are just done out of spite to the performer almost. That's what it feels like as the audience member of like it's I could just picture, Bruce and Vince going womp womp, look at that. Instead of being a catalyst. But has there ever I can't think of a time there's only so few failed cash-ins did any one of them didn't look stupid in the
No,
process?
I feel like most of them did. I mean, Braun Strowman, when he cashed in at Money in the Bank or at Hell in a Cell, and it ended in a no contest with Brock
Yes.
Lesnar just ripping open the cell door, and that was it. Like that, I mean, that was ridiculous.
Well, that was an instance where from a logical perspective, the audience didn't even understand what that even meant because he cashed it in, and then the match
Match
kind
never
of didn't
finished.
have a didn't
Yeah.
even have an outcome. So they're like, does he still get? Does that count or not? So to me, that's the even worse reaction
Yeah.
of like I'm not even sure what happens at this point because there's no
No,
rule book for this.
I would totally agree with you. Um, yeah, I mean, Otis again lost the briefcase. Um, Austin Theory, we described already what happened. John Cena, that was a DQ. So he kind of looked silly, I guess, a little bit. I don't think there's enough baseline examples for us to really have a full declaration, but generally speaking, I don't think anyone's looked stronger out of losing the briefcase and smarter out of it.
Has anyone looked? How about the opposite? Has anyone looked weaker after cashing it in? Or most of the time they do look strong.
Weaker after
No,
cashing
no,
in.
I there's a recent one.
Who would you
Big,
say?
Big E.
Yeah, I would say Big E, and I wouldn't say it's because of the fact that he won the championship. It was because of how it was done so spur of the moment and without reason. Again, he declared the day of on Twitter, "I'm cashing in tonight." It was not an earned act. It was not an earned statement from Big E. He had no qualms with Bobby Lashley. Nothing had been established for him to want to go and do that in canon. And then it just happened to pop a rating with no follow through from that. And he kind of toiled and then was left to go against Roman Reigns. And he just kind of flopped under that. And then his reign ended unceremoniously.
Well, but that's kind of what I'm talking
Yeah, I
about
know.
is that as like, okay, we're going to use this as a catalyst, and for a short period of time, they have the title, and then next thing you know, like they don't look any strong. They look weaker than they did previously to what we I still look at Big E as an audience member as someone that didn't get what they deserved, even though they got the title, which is something that the audience should never feel as the storyteller gave you what you wanted, and now you feel even less. Like nothing against Big E. I feel nothing less for Big E, the character or the performer. It's more of the fact of, oh, they it almost feels like the storyteller placated us. And it feels now I feel even more contempt towards the storyteller.
Well, they booked for a moment and not for a story.
But it's
And
all
it
about
had
the
adverse
moments.
reaction.
They're all about the moments.
I know.
Putting smiles on faces.
We're in the third inning, pal.
Um,
Oh my goodness.
are there any other thoughts that you have on
No,
in any in should are there any more innovative ways to use this storytelling element that has not already been done,
I mean,
or are there things that have been done to death that you'd wish just stopped happening?
I feel like I threw a couple different things out there for WWE Creative to listen up to of ways that you could help tell some stories with these. Again, between a character losing and then that being a catalyst for them to turn after winning, or as we described, the flip side scenario of that in how they go about making sense of cashing in and failing, and how do you respond from that. I think there's a myriad of ways you can go. I enjoy the Money in the Bank stipulation. Honestly, I think Money in the Bank has become almost as important as the Royal Rumble, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. I just think that sometimes it gets a little tropey. It gets a little tropey with who is holding the briefcase and how they act once they have the briefcase. I think if you lean into the proper developments with their characters and you flesh it out over time, you can really use that as an effective tool.
And
But we've
what are your
seen
thoughts about, because we didn't mention this, because people bring it up all the time. I mean, especially like Io Sky. It's been what, maybe a week. She's the second longest holder of the women's Money in
yeah.
the Bank. Do you think the time limit? Do you think do you think do you think it would be more or less effective if you shortened the time limit?
No, I don't think that's an issue. I think a year is fine. I think a year is totally fine. It's just we've seen them booking for moments more than anything. That's really what it boils down to, Jordan. When you have
But if
these
they took
quick
out the time limit, let's say, like John, if they took out the time limit, you could cash in the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Wouldn't it close the loophole of, well, you can't call your shot at WrestleMania main event anymore, because that's, I mean, obviously they used to do it at WrestleMania itself.
And I personally loved when it was at WrestleMania. I thought that really added equity to the stipulation too.
But do you think like do you look at the women's Money in the Bank different than the men's,
I mean, you
simply
have
because
to a little bit,
it feels like they've told more stories with the men's briefcases than with
but
the
there's
women?
also a much smaller track record. There's also a much smaller track record. You know, the women's Money in the Bank match, I think the first one was 2016, right? That sound about right? Carmella? Maybe
Mhm.
2017, something like that.
And technically, she didn't even win it.
Well, James Ellsworth won it, and then they did the match on SmackDown again that week. They did the same exact ladder match again, and she won it the second time after James Ellsworth died a death of doom from a ladder, if I recall correctly. Yeah, that was interesting. That was it. But you know what? I don't hate it, because guess what? In a ladder match like that, a smart heel would have someone helping them. That is truthfully one of my favorite things about TLC 2, is that all those teams had someone extra to help them.
Because isn't technically a no DQ match?
Yes, it's an ODQ match.
So why aren't there other people out there?
That's what I'm saying. These heels got to smarten up, man.
And people crapped on the Casino ladder match from last year where MJF with the firm.
Yeah, I mean, I
came
didn't love
in.
the execution of that per
Oh,
se.
okay. You
But
like the idea, but
I
just
like the
not.
idea. I like the idea, but just because he wasn't even in the match, if I'm not mistaken.
Who says that you have to be? I mean,
I
obviously
mean,
now it's breaking down.
I think you should have to be an announced. I mean, Brock Lesnar wasn't, and he just showed up and got thrown in as Ali stood there like a goober at the top, waiting and waiting for Brock to just storm up the ladder. I think that is a baseline, because then in theory, anyone could just run in. It should be a baseline that you have been put in this match. I think when the bell rings, you have to be there to start.
Yeah, but there's plenty of other things where that there are, John, there are plenty of other things where someone could run in at any time and they don't. The one, I don't know if this fits on any show that we'll ever talk about, is when someone, a world title holder, issues like an open challenge in the middle of the ring,
Sure.
and it's like, what, dude? Why aren't like the jobbers coming out? And
Why isn't
you're
there
like,
a whole group of people trying to?
right? How it's always it's like
Well, they did that one time recently in
with
WWE.
Avalon.
Was was it with Pete? No, in WWE they did it. What did they do with Peter Avalon?
No, they did it with Avalon.
No, I'm saying what did they do with Avalon?
Someone that it was I don't know, Wardlow or something. It was one of the titles or
Yeah.
whatever.
No, so this happened in WWE, and I'm trying to remember what title it was. But it was like an open challenge, and then they went to the back, and you saw a bunch of guys just fighting each other trying to get to the ring, because it's like, who's gonna be the one to actually like make it there, and who's gonna be the first one. And I was like, wow, okay, that makes sense. Like a bunch of guys are just in the hallway just beating the shit out of each other to see who's gonna stand on top and make their way to the ring for the open challenge. That I thought that was good. I thought that was like a quality way to actually explain that. Yeah, Jungle Boy being the one to just be like, I want Sonata, and getting it was interesting. But alas,
We'll,
Here
we'll,
we
we'll, we'll talk more about like the open challenge
Sure.
stuff on future podcasts. Dude, there's so many variables that go into pro wrestling storytelling. Like you go, like how long can this podcast even? How many weeks can you do this? Like, dude, I can come up with like 300 things that you could talk an hour each about because there's so many nuances and so many variables that go into like, well, what if this happens? And then if that happens, and in the past they've done this. And that's one of the good things about pro wrestling is that there's so much canon to work on that the more that you learn from the past, the easier it is to like manipulate the audience in the future.
Absolutely. And we will be manipulating you, our audience, for the future on future editions of the Theory of Pro Wrestling.
If you want to be manipulated by Jon Alba, wrestling according to Alba.com.
In a non-cancelable way, you will be manipulated. I want to make that very clear. Very clear.
Right. If you have any thoughts of unique ways that briefcase title stipulation holder, feel free to post them in the comments. Hit that thumbs up button on YouTube if you'd like. But join the Discord, right? Join the Patreon.
Hell yeah.
Right? When we had to do a tape study on one of these types of matches.
Hell yeah.
Have you done a Money in the Bank tape
I don't
study?
think I have done a Money in the Bank tape study. I think we'll have to now.
So join, and you'll get all the past content. I mean, you've been putting out content there,
rocking and rolling, baby,
2 or 3 times a week for a while. So you get all the old content, all this tape studies, all the Ask Albas,
the archive,
and get to participate in the Discord community, wrestling according to Alba.com. And you could also find him on Twitter at Jon Alba, Jon_Alba on Threads. Let's see. Is Fetch going to happen? Are you going to try to keep on making Fetch happening with Threads?
I'm into. We took a break in between taping. I threaded in between, so I'm going to try to stick with it. I hope you're going to try to stick with it too.
I haven't posted. I check in and go, okay, this is what's going on. Social networks are very hard to.
I get it, man. Especially when you got to post the same thing on 3 different networks.
Totally so I set up my account there just to have it. That's kind of like my emergency bunker.
Okay.
Like when Twitter explodes.
When Twitter finally goes down.
Right. Gotcha. Right. I mean, if there was a way to import everything from Twitter, like all your Twitter followers, all everything, and just gone Thread, I mean, I'd do it in a second, but it doesn't.
Unfortunately, you and I both have more than 17,000 followers, and we can't just translate them over to Threads.
Right. And I never use Instagram. So like to me, like, I
was never hot enough to be good at Instagram. So that was part of the problem.
People would say otherwise.
I mean, like a select niche group of people, a select niche.
You would consider yourself attractive?
Imposter syndrome is a hell of a drug, Jordan. You know,
I think that you're this is a better way to put it. For wrestling talent, you're like a 6. For wrestling audience, you're 9.5.
That's a fair point. Right. I'll give you that. Okay.
Right. Depending on which side of the barricade you're on. Like if you're in the ring, you're okay. You're about average. If you're watching from the stands, you're one of the hottest guys.
There is one person in pro wrestling who I would consider to be very attractive, who also found me very attractive, and that was like I'm putting that in my pocket and holding that for the rest of my life. Okay. So aside from that, I think you're right.
So you can tell tell Jon Alba how attractive he is in the comments or on Twitter at Jon Alba. You can follow me at BlenderHD on Twitter and everywhere else. And we'll be coming back at you next week, looking at more storytelling and narrative devices on the Theory of Pro Wrestling.